Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, are Psalm 83 and Isaiah 17 about to be fulfilled? And some would say, well, no, because they don't prophesy any future event. Those describe things in the past, or they never described events that were taking place or going to take place at all. So we're going to address those subjects today, but what brings that up is this. So last Friday, we did a live stream. John Holler put this together. It was a prophecy roundtable on Israel's coming war in the north, and it included John Holler, Tom Hughes, Pete Garcia, and myself, and we talked about the threat of Hezbollah on Israel's northern border. And we talked about specifically this article from JNS. I'm going to put a link to this. I'm going to pin it at the top of the comments so you can check this out if you haven't had a chance to read through this. But it also included this video as well, which you need to make sure that you watch in order to understand the threat, the nature of the threat that Israel faces on its northern border. Now, I believe that conflict between Israel and Hezbollah is inevitable and is likely coming very soon, within a matter of weeks or months or days, whatever it may be. But I don't necessarily think this is a decade into the future because of many reasons, one of which is the relocation of over 60,000 Israelis who were living in the north, who have had to move and be temporarily relocated. They've been living out of suitcases for months now. That can't continue on indefinitely. Similar thing is happening to Lebanese citizens living in southern Lebanon. They've had to relocate out of the way because there has been, over 4,000, I think it's 4,400 violent incidents involving Israel and Hezbollah since October 7th. So while we haven't seen outright war, all-out war erupt between Israel and Hezbollah, it's not as if everything's been completely quiet, nothing's been happening. But I think October 7th really was a wake-up call for Israel and those that pay attention to Israel's security situation, that having these threats on its immediate border is there's no way to necessarily manage that. You're really taking a great risk of really an existential threat, because as we discussed in this video, and again, I'll go back and watch that video. You can find it on the channel in the video links. It would have been Friday's video. I think it came out on Saturday. So it was a live stream on Friday. I posted it to the channel on Saturday. You can also find it on John Holler's site as well, on his channel. But we talked about what was going on, what was the likelihood, what would happen as a result of this. And it was brought up that school may have to be canceled for a year, that people would be in bomb shelters all day long, not just for 5 minutes or an hour. And guys, society at some point, when you have a prolonged conflict of that nature, society simply breaks down. So Israel can't really afford to enter into a protracted conflict with Hezbollah where their society simply discontinues functioning, and it would be an existential threat to the state of Israel and its ability to go on. So therefore, I think that they see that threat. They are intent to eliminate it. Again, we had the relocation of over 60,000 people in northern Israel that needs to come to a resolution. Can't just make all of northern Israel a buffer zone. There's supposed to be a buffer zone under a UN resolution that goes from the border up until the Litani River, that's been totally ignored by Hezbollah. So my guess is at the very least, Israel would try to push that buffer zone back to where it should be under the UN Security Council resolution. But we're going to see this conflict, and when it happens, again, it can't be this protracted, long drawn-out conflict where there's a barrage of rockets on a daily basis for months on end from Hezbollah, because what they have at their disposal is many magnitudes more powerful than what Hamas had at its disposal. Hezbollah is directly funded, trained, equipped by the state of Iran. So they have a lot more powerful weapons at their disposal. That leads me to believe that ultimately Israel will have to use overwhelming, decisive force to eliminate this threat on its border once and for all. And that very well may mean nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction. I believe the Bible foretells something similar to that may actually be part of this conflict. We don't know for sure, but let's take a look at what some of those are. And the first of those, and I see these two events tied together, is Psalm 83. So let's take a look at Psalm 83 and what it says. Now, there are many good Bible teachers, pastors, experts in the Bible who believe that Psalm 83 is nothing more than an imprecatory prayer, meaning imprecatory prayer is to invoke a curse upon one's enemies. So pray for the enemy's downfall. And that's all it is. It doesn't foretell any future event. I disagree. I'm going to talk about why, but let's take a look at what this has to say. So Psalm 83, this was written by Asaph. It says, "O God, do not be silent, do not be deaf, do not be quiet, O God. Don't you hear the uproar of your enemies? Don't you see that your arrogant enemies are rising up? They devise crafty schemes against your people. They conspire against your precious ones. Come, they say, let us wipe out Israel as a nation. We will destroy the very memory of its existence. Yes, this was their unanimous decision against you." So, guys, this is exactly what we've been hearing since 1948 from Israel's immediate neighbors and from the Muslim Arab world in general, is to wipe out Israel as a nation. So this is what we're hearing today. That's one reason to think this is talking about today and not sometime in the past. Then it goes on and says, "They signed a treaty as allies against you, these Edomites, Ishmaelites, Moabites, Hagrites, Gebalites, Ammonites, and Amalekites, and people from Philistia and Tyre. Israel has joined them too and is allied with the descendants of Lot." So you may say, well, all of these were ancient nations, but where do these stand today? So I wrote an article on this many years ago. So I'm going to turn to the Rapture Ready site for those who are familiar with that. This is an article on the destruction of Damascus. I think it's older than this because I think this is the date that got put on this when they built a new site and transferred files over from the old site. I know that picture is older than 2011. Look at all that hair that I have there. And I think the bio has us with one child instead of three. So it's an old article. But what it's describing has not changed. So here are the people groups that were listed in Psalm 83 that we just read about, and where those geographical areas are today. And what we see is Gaza, Lebanon, parts of Syria, Turkey, Iraq, and what is called the West Bank today. Guys, this is where Israel's immediate enemies reside, those threatening the existence of Israel, calling for an end to Israel. This is where we see Hamas, Hezbollah, and various terrorist groups that are committed to the destruction of Israel and the elimination of Israel. John Holler mentioned in that video on Friday that as they go into the homes in Gaza, almost across the board, everyone has maps, framed maps hanging on their walls, and Israel does not exist as a nation in those maps. So this is, as I said, the unanimous decision to wipe out Israel as a nation and destroy the very memory of its existence. And these nations we read about here in verses 6 through 8 are where we see the immediate threat on Israel's borders today, where we see those terrorist groups and people groups that are committed to the destruction of Israel. We also read about things like, let us seize for our own use these pasture lands of God. And so that, again, that's the exact same thing we hear being talked about today. And so here we get to, well, the imprecatory prayer part of Psalm 83, where there's a prayer, there's an ask. Oh God, oh my God, scatter them like tumbleweed, like chaff before the wind, as a fire burns a forest, and as a flame sets mountains ablaze. Chase them with your fierce storm, terrify them with your tempest. Utterly disgrace them until they submit to your name, O Lord. Let them be ashamed and terrified forever. Let them die in disgrace. Then they will learn that you alone are called the Lord, that you alone are the Most High, supreme over all the earth. So again, we have many people would say, well, this is just a prayer. And I admit this is a prayer, but I believe it's also a prophecy. And we have reason to believe that Asaph himself, the author of Psalm 83, was a prophet. That doesn't necessarily mean that this has to be a prophecy, but it's important to point out that he was a prophet, because we read about in Matthew chapter 13, verses 34 through 35, it says, Jesus always used stories and illustrations like these when speaking to the crowds. In fact, he never spoke to them without using such parables. This fulfilled what God had spoken through the prophet. Quote, I will speak to you in parables. I will explain things hidden since the creation of the world. So here it says spoken through the prophet. So we have the word of God, Matthew chapter 13, pointing to these verses as coming from a prophet. They come from Psalm 78, verse 2. Psalm 78 is from the same Asaph who wrote Psalm 83. So here we have biblical proof that Asaph was a prophet. Again, that does not prove that Psalm 83 itself is a prophecy. However, I believe that there is a link within that that leads me to believe that it is. And that's where we get to Isaiah 17. So in Isaiah chapter 17, we read about a message concerning Damascus and Israel. And this is where we talk about the destruction of Damascus and Damascus ceasing to be a city. So it says, look, the city of Damascus will disappear. It will become a heap of ruins. The towns of Aroer will be deserted. Flocks will graze in the streets and lie down undisturbed, and no one will chase them away. So it's painting this picture that no one is there to chase them away. The fortified towns of Israel will also be destroyed, and the royal power of Damascus will end. All that remains of Syria will share the fate of Israel's departed glory, declares the Lord of Heaven's armies. So this goes on to paint a very dim picture, not just for Damascus and the areas around it of Syria, but also for much of Israel. So this is not a happy event that we're reading about. But I believe this prophesies a future event because, again, some people claim, well, this was fulfilled in the past when the king of Assyria conquered Damascus. But I believe this is pointing to a time when Damascus will disappear. It says, look, the city of Damascus will disappear. It will cease to be a city. Damascus is what's believed to be the longest continuously inhabited city on the face of the earth. We can trace its history back about 5,000 years. So Damascus never ceased to become a city with no one in it to chase flocks away. So I believe this remains a future event. But there's a couple of verses that I talked about in that video on Friday, and I want to just take the time to bring them to your attention so you can study this as well. So, and those would be verses 13 in both Psalm 83 and Isaiah 17. So here we have Psalm 83. Again, this is a prayer of what to do to Israel's enemies. And here in verse 13, we have this statement, "Oh my God, scatter them like tumbleweed, like chaff before the wind." So this is a request from God to scatter Israel's enemies like tumbleweed, like chaff before the wind. Then we go to Isaiah chapter 17, verse 13, and we read this. It says, "But though they thunder like breakers on a beach, God will silence them, and they will run away. They will flee like chaff scattered by the wind, like a tumbleweed whirling before a storm." So we have Psalm 83, which is a request to scatter them like tumbleweed, like chaff before the wind. We have Isaiah 17 saying, they will flee like chaff scattered by the wind, like a tumbleweed whirling before a storm. So we had the prayer, and we had the answer to the prayer. So we have a request, we have an actual event being described as God doing these things to Israel's enemies. I believe that paints a picture of Psalm 83 and Isaiah 17 being linked together as one and the same event, and I believe that is a future event. Now again, other people disagree, people that I hold in high regard. So this isn't something that I'm dogmatic about, where I'm going to say, this is the way it is, I'm right. I very well could be wrong. I don't know, but this is what, after studying these passages for years, studying these before I knew there was any controversy over them, these are the conclusions that I drew. You should search the scriptures for yourself, draw your own conclusions, ask God for guidance, say, Holy Spirit, direct me to the truth, help me to understand these. If you ask for understanding, I believe God will grant you that understanding and that wisdom in regard to his word. So ask for that, seek it, look for truth, and study these passages for yourself. Now, Bill Salas has taught on Psalm 83 as a prophecy of a future war for between 15 and 20 years. I tend to be in agreement with what he's saying. He has what he calls the inner ring of nations and the outer ring of nations. The inner ring of nations being these nations that are described in Psalm 83. They are people groups that are on the immediate borders of Israel today, calling to wipe away Israel as a nation. They are the direct threat on Israel's borders. That would be the inner ring of nations, as he would call them. Now, the outer ring of nations would be the nations we read about in Ezekiel 38 and 39, the Gog of Magog coalition of nations or alliance of nations, which includes Russia and Turkey, Iran, Libya, a whole number of different nations, but it does not include any of these immediate bordering groups that today stands against Israel. And the answer has always been, why? Something Ezekiel 38 and 39 also says is that at the time of the Gog of Magog invasion, Israel will be at peace, a land of unwalled villages, and it will be in a tranquil state of peace, meaning just tranquility. They won't even expect any sort of attack. They will be living in a state that they definitively do not live in today. So the question would be, what happens to those threats that we see coming from Gaza today, that we see on the northern border with Hezbollah? What happens to these threats? Somehow they disappear between now and Ezekiel 38 and 39. I believe there's a very high probability that the events of October 7th have started a chain reaction, so to speak, that will lead to further conflict. And in the aftermath of that conflict, we will see the enemies on Israel's immediate borders completely vanquished. Again, Isaiah 17 does not paint a pretty picture. I do not want to see that. But that's what the Bible is telling us is going to happen. We very well could see the fulfillment, I believe, of Psalm 83 and Isaiah 17 in the very near future. And in doing so, it could very well create the conditions that lead to Israel living in peace, feeling secure in its borders and in its existence, not feeling the existential threat it feels now, and being in a place that sets the stage for the Ezekiel 38-39 Gog of Magog invasion, of which we've been seeing for quite some time, those nations aligning themselves with one another for many years now, for the first time in human history. No one can point back and say, well, this was fulfilled in 1000 BC. No, Ezekiel 38-39 alliance has never existed, and it very clearly states in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that this will take place in the latter days when God has brought the people from among the nations back into the land. So it is a clear description of the modern day nation of Israel. So could we be on the brink of seeing Psalm 83 and Isaiah 17 fulfilled as prophecies? I believe the answer is yes. So, guys, this is a sign of the times in which we live. Again, this is, as I said, Isaiah, these don't paint a pretty picture of what could be on the horizon, but we are to have no fear, because while this is a sign of the times, it's a sign of the times that Jesus is coming back. We know Jesus has already won the victory. And guys, if you know Jesus, he gives you a peace that surpasses all understanding so that you can weather the storms of this life. No matter what this world throws at us, you can smile and be filled with hope because you know Jesus has already won the victory. He's in heaven right now, preparing a place for his children, for his people. He's coming back to get us. Guys, our destination is heaven. No matter what we have to endure in this world, Jesus said we'll have to endure many trials and tribulations in this world, but take heart, he has overcome the world. So guys, have hope in all of this. Be watchmen of what's going on, but most importantly, share the good news with those around you. Tell them about the hope and the peace that you have in Jesus, that in spite of all these things going on in the world around us today, that you have hope and you have tranquility, real tranquility, a peace that the world cannot give because you know Jesus. So let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Again, I know many people disagree with these passages being prophecy. That's fine. Leave your reasons below in the comments. Let me know what your reason for believing that is. Teach me. I'm teachable. I'm humble. I'm listening. Again, I'm not dogmatic about these things and saying this is absolutely the way it will happen. It's just how I interpret things. So I'm open to hearing maybe things stated in a way that I haven't heard before. So let me know that. Leave your comments below. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. God willing, I will see you on Wednesday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to visit my Substack at brittgillette.substack.com. There you'll find my latest videos and articles, as well as notes, where I share the latest news headlines, the articles I'm reading, and the videos I'm watching. Subscribe for free, and each new post on Substack will be sent directly to your email. Just scroll to the bottom of the homepage and hit the subscribe button. As an added bonus, your first welcome email will include a link to a copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt Gillette on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.